Hey everyone, it's Jana from The Last Stitch. In this video I want to share with you a couple of makes I've done lately, including this blouse and a pair of rather dressy trousers. So in this video I will share all about those and of course give you some really useful sewing tips. This is a pattern from Burdastyle from 2018. I will link to that pattern in the description section. The cool thing about this pattern is mainly the sleeves. These are like waterfall sleeves, so they are draped and they're actually open here in the center, and then they drape really beautiful. And this is actually the second time I'm making this pattern because I love it so much. So if you go back and watch one of my older videos that I will link to, you will find another version of this pattern. The original one has a keyhole here, but because I don't like to suffer too much for my art, it's hard enough anyways to create beautiful binding on very delicate drapey fabric such as rayon, which this is, and silk. So because I struggle so much with the last version, I actually decided to go a bit more easier. And I really like this boat neck as well because, as you can see, the theme of the fabric is very nautical. So it has this cute little anchors printed all over the fabric. So this was from the Danish fabric store Stoff & Steel, which has online stores available in many different countries. So perhaps you can also find this fabric. I don't know if it's still available, but it's a beautiful quality, really soft to wear, and also it drapes really beautiful. As I said, this is a very slippery fabric, so I want to give you a couple of tips that I have learned the hard way. First of all, this neckline or any type of rounded opening needs to be stay stitched as soon as the fabric leaves the cutting table, because this type of soft drapey fabric is cut slightly on the bias, it will grow like crazy. So if you don't stay stitch, place the fabric, sew a straight stitch on your regular sewing machine. You can also do a little bit of a finger pressing behind if you have already seen it grow. It's called e-stitching, where you press the fabric with your finger behind the presser foot to kind of get it back into shape right when it's been growing. So that's something I definitely recommend. Another tip that I learned the hard way is that instead of using fusible interfacing, it's usually a much better idea to use silk organza to stabilize any details. So for instance, there are cuffs on this blouse, and way back when I was a bit more unexperienced, I regularly used fusible interfacing, but sometimes they don't gel that well with these type of delicate fabrics. And unless you are sure that you use a really good quality product, you might actually end up with some puckering, and it's just not a good look. It's not worth the risk, to be honest, even though you do use a good brand. I have now, since about 15 years now, switched to using silk organza instead. So that's what I always do now when I sew garments in silk and rayon. It's a wonderful thing. I just place it on the inner side of the fabric. I usually place it before I overcast the edges, so this I just serge it in place. Of course you can't fuse it in place because it's the fabric, but I find that enough. And I just underline the inner side. So that's a really, really helpful idea. It's also great when you're sewing colors on a delicate fabric. It's also really good if you're working with eyelet fabrics, right? Because fusible won't work with that open surface. So yeah, silk organza, there's also cotton organza. These two fabrics are like the secret, I think, of fine sewing. And definitely worthwhile investing in if you want to like level up your end result. There's no going back for me. I will stay away from the fusibles when it comes to delicate fabric, as I find that the organza, it just makes everything so much easier. The neckline on this type of fabric is tricky, and I personally don't recommend that you use facing because it just adds too much bulk, and you know how facings has a tendency of flopping up. And so what I always do is that I use a narrow binding. So I fold the binding strip in the middle, I attach it on the right side facing, then I fold it back and stitch along the edge. Now you don't get this even stitching without basting. At least I don't, so don't be fooled. There is no magic hands doing this. I always baste when I'm working with this delicate fabric. I wouldn't say that my binding on silk fabric is like haute couture level, because it's not, but by following this method, very narrow strip to make sure that it lies flat, and also the basting, that will, to me at least, be good enough. And I usually aim for a width that is maximum 1 centimeters, I would say. No more than that, because as soon as you add more to width, you will have the problem of, it flipping out a little bit like that. You don't want that, do you? So that's another tip when it comes to finishing the neckline. Use a narrow binding. That's probably the best bet most of the time. Another issue that you will run into when you're sewing this soft fabric is sometimes drag lines on the hem. So those annoying diagonal lines because the feeding is a little bit uneven. What I do is that I use an awl or some other tool, sometimes even my fingers, to press and push the upper layer of the fabric towards the presser foot, and that will ensure even feeding. Now, I know many of you like to use a walking foot instead, so definitely stick to that if that works for you. What I like about using this manual method is that it gives me so much control, because if I see it's a bit too much, then I just push the fabric a little less. And if I see I need to do more, I just increase the amount of fabric that I feed towards the presser foot. This is like, when you get the hang of this, it's like you are connected to the fabric. It's like magic. And this is one of the things that I felt been a big breakthrough for me when it comes to my own sewing for the last decade or so, is that I've really been very conscious about how I work with the fabric and using my fingers to really manipulate and control the fabric. And that has been one of the single biggest game changer for me. So you can read as many sewing books as you like and watch as many videos you like, but one of my biggest take home that I want to share with you is to use your fingers, your senses basically, to feel the fabric. And I sound a little bit woo-woo now, but this has been such a big breakthrough in so many aspects of sewing for me, that I've become so good at handling the fabric while I'm sewing. So if you're struggling, that could be an area maybe that you could try to work a bit more and see if you can also find that rhythmic dance where you kind of almost align with the fabric while you're all sewing. And here are the pants. Again, it's a Burdastyle pattern. They are cigarette pants. I've actually done another version previously that I'm wearing right now, actually. I just like this pattern so much because it has so many fun details. So for instance, look at these pockets. They are like flaps that are on the top, and I've actually this time made them with a working buttonhole. Yeah, I am impressed with myself, because on the last pattern I did a few years back, I was actually cheating, because sometimes, you don't want to suffer too much for your sewing, but I was feeling good about myself. So I added these as well. On the back, I added a welt pocket, because actually the original one has a flap on the back too, but I found that just added a lot of bulkiness in a way that I didn't want on the back side, right, of my pants. So I added regular good old welt pockets. And then I had an aha moment. This could be contribute to the fact that I am not a specialist within, tailoring details. I would say that my skills are more towards sewing with knits and sewing jeans and things like that. And of course, activewear. But I am not at my A game when it comes to this. So when I realized, because I just sewed the welt first, and because the pocket is quite wide, I noticed how the welt kind of dropped. So I could see, and when I looked at from the side of the pocket, the side of the back, I could see that on the side where the pocket was, that my pants were kind of dropping a little bit, right? This could be that I did something wrong, but I just sew the welt pockets I normally do. I stitched close to the edge to make sure that it didn't flop out, but still that happened. So if you have any tips to prevent this, please share in the comment section. I think there must be more people than myself that are struggling with this type of technique. But then I realized that when I see a lot of finer store-bought pants, they often have this little hook, like fabric hook and a little bit of button. Then I was like, aha, now I know that's for. It's just not to make it look cute. It can also help keeping the pocket from dropping down. So that's what I did, and that was an easy fix. I just had to rip open a little bit here and just insert this one. It's very, very simple to do, and I think it looks super cute. To be honest, the button is a little bit bulky, but that's because I wanted to use the same buttons as I had on the front. Maybe I switched that around. But luckily also, I should say that the button sits so high up, so it doesn't I don't have to sit on it, you know? So I guess it would have only been an issue I was like lying down in the pants. So that's a really helpful tip as well that I want to share with you. Another tip that I do when I'm sewing dressier pants is the waistband, because this is a stretchy fabric as well. First of all, I always interface both the outer and the inner waistband using a soft, delicate, lightweight, fusible interfacing, because that doesn't change the hand of the waistband. It's still soft, but it gives that stability that makes it so much easier to stitch and control, and also it keeps it from growing when you're working with it. So that's my number one recommendation. The second recommendation that I have is to always stitch a full line on the inner piece of the waistband, because you know, you usually attach the waistband, you start by attaching it from the outside, and then you have the inner piece that it needs to be folded in and then stitched into place, right? So what I do is that I stitch that line, press the edge in according to that line, and then I have a beautiful razor sharp press fold that will stay in place, and it's also very even. So that's my number 2 tip. First of all, always interface both the outside and the inside, and secondly, stitch that fold line just to make sure that you get that really nice even fold. And another struggle, right, is when you're stitching the waistband is to keep it in place. You don't want, you know, your waistband to look like this on the inside, especially if you're a little bit particular like I am. I want my stuff to look good on the inside too. That's usually a goal. So I have 2 suggestions for you here. The easiest one is just to base it in place, which is absolutely helpful. Hand basting is such an undervalued tool and will just save you so much time and heartache later on. Another tip is to use those water-soluble Wonder tape, which is double-sided tape that you place on that folded seam allowance on the inside. Then you press it in place, and then you're good to go to stitch it all around. So I always use one and sometimes a combination of those 2 methods when I'm sewing my waistband. And by my standards, I think my waistband are starting to look pretty good now on the inside. They're again not like haute couture level, nowhere near, but they are definitely good enough for me. And that is because I have employed these tips and techniques that I share with you now. So I hope you can also have some benefits of trying that stuff out. And if you have any other suggestions on how to sew really neat waistbands, please tell me in the comment section. I'm sure we are many who are dying to know those tricks as well, because I know there are more ways of doing this thing. And also when I'm sewing dressier pants, I don't actually top stitch on top of the waistband, because I think that kind of makes it a bit too casual. So what I do is I use the much beloved stitch in the ditch method. I'm sure most of you already know what it is, but if you don't, it's basically where you stitch a straight stitch usually in the ridge that is created where 2 fabrics are joined. So basically in the ditch of the seam, which means that on the side that you are stitching, the stitch will be absolutely invisible because it is hidden in the ditch, right? And on the reverse side, of course, it will be visible, but just as a narrow stitch very close to the edge, and you will find that being fairly easy to sew if you're following the suggestions that I just gave you on you know, making sure that the band is very evenly folded and pressed and stays in place. As for the fit, again, I would say that pants are my nemesis. every time I do a new pants, there's always something with the fit that is off. Now I thought I had it nailed down because this is the second time I used the pattern, but I used a different type of fabric, and again, there is some bagginess in the back. But if I were to obsess about that even more, I wouldn't stop sewing, basically. So stop sewing pants at least. So I am at the point where I have to give myself grace, right? Because these pants that I make myself are still much more well-fitting than anything I would be able to find in a store, which I think is a good standard to set, right? I love them. They're super comfortable. The fabric is stretch suiting fabric. I think it's a mix with lycra, polyester, and rayon. I also used my favorite way of hemming, namely using the blind hem stitch method, using my regular sewing machine. This is such a wonderful way of hemming. If you watch any other of my videos, you will know how big a fan I am of this technique. And if you are struggling with it or are unfamiliar with it, I've done the most extensive tutorial on this very topic that, again, I will link to in the description section, where I really break this method down and show you how to really perfect it and make sure you don't have those issues that are commonly associated with using the blind hem stitch. So yeah, that was my full wardrobe. I've been sewing so much for my upcoming jeans sewing book lately, so this is the only thing that I have time for. I am definitely looking forward to make more stuff just for fun now. So I have a few more projects lined up that I will share with you moving forward. So if you have any more questions, I will of course link to these particular pattern numbers. They are both from the Burdastyle magazine. Those will be in the description section, so you can check them out and see if that's something you want to make yourself. So I was really excited now to share those new makes with you, and hopefully also found some of my sewing tips useful. Stay safe, and well, I talk to you soon. Bye bye!